When Ben, a decorated veteran, wanted to enter the plane, something unexpected happened. He realized that he had lost his ticket, and the airplane staff refused to let him board. Ben could not believe that this was happening. He had just shown his ticket to them minutes ago, but still they refused to let him in. But luckily, Ben knew a different way to get in. He only had to make one phone call. The staff turned pale when finding out who he had called. But who did Ben call? How was he able to get on the plane after all? And why did the crew turn pale? Before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Ben had been invited to attend a special ceremony in the country where he once served, honoring veterans like himself. The government had generously provided him with a business-class ticket, acknowledging his sacrifices and contributions. Because of the business-class upgrade, Ben was quite excited about flying. On the day of his flight, Ben made sure to double-check everything. After making sure he had his passport, plane ticket, and luggage ready, he hopped in a taxi and drove to the airport. So when it was time for boarding, Ben was one of the first passengers in line, and he expected to be in his seat very quickly, but it soon became clear that it would not be as easy as he had hoped. The boarding agent asked to see Ben's passport, and he happily showed it to her. "Your boarding pass, please," she said, and Ben chuckled when he realized that he had forgotten to take it out of his bag. "Of course, just a moment, please. Let me find it." But when he checked his bag, the boarding pass wasn't there. He was convinced that that was where he had left it. Ben smiled kindly at the boarding agent and told her, "I can't seem to find it right now," thinking she would let him board anyway since he had already needed to scan his boarding pass to check in. But this did not happen. The boarding agent didn't even smile back at Ben or try to hide her displeasure. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Ben was stunned. Was she being serious? "Sir, you're holding up the rest. Either you leave now, willingly, or we'll have to call the police," the boarding agent suddenly demanded. "Please, you have to believe me. I have a seat on that plane." Ben tried to plead with her, but nothing seemed to work. Ben felt a wave of frustration but kept his composure, clinging to hope. Realizing his continued presence was only escalating the situation, Ben stepped aside. His movements were slow, weighed down by disbelief and disappointment. As the last of the passengers disappeared down the jetway, a stark realization hit Ben. He watched, feeling a sense of urgency rising within him. The gate was closing, and with it his chances of making the flight and the ceremony. With a deep breath, Ben reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. It was his last hope. A lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. Making this call could change everything, he knew. With a resolute click, he made his decision. Ben pressed the phone to his ear, his expression hardened with determination. The line connected, and Ben spoke with urgency, his voice low and firm. "I need your help," he began, his words rushing out. The response on the other end was inaudible, but Ben's reaction spoke volumes. Ben's voice was a low murmur, his conversation barely audible amid the terminal's hum. He spoke with measured words, each sentence carefully crafted. Nearby passengers and staff, having witnessed Ben's urgent call, began to whisper among themselves. "Who could he be talking to?" someone murmured. As Ben's call drew to a close, his voice grew more earnest. "Please, I need this," he implored, a note of desperation creeping in. "Thank you," he whispered, a mixture of relief and apprehension in his voice. The call ended, leaving Ben in a state of hopeful anticipation. After ending the call, Ben's eyes immediately shifted to the large clock hanging above the gate. The minutes were slipping away, each one heightening his anxiety. The boarding agent, with a final glance at Ben, reached for her walkie-talkie. "Gate closing for Flight 217, she announced, her voice void of emotion. Ben watched in despair as she relayed the message, the finality of her words striking him like a physical blow. Ben stood motionless as the plane began to taxi away. He watched, disheartened, as it moved further and further from the gate, taking with it his last vestiges of hope. Just as the plane began to move, an airport employee hurried towards Ben and the agent. Ben's eyes widened in surprise, his heart skipping a beat. The unexpected arrival of the employee paused the finality of the moment. The employee leaned in, whispering something into the agent's ear. The words were inaudible, but their impact was immediate. The agent's rigid demeanor softened, her eyebrows rising in apparent surprise. The agent turned to Ben, her previously stern face now wearing a forced smile. "There's been a mix-up," she explained, her tone unexpectedly amiable. "You can board the plane." Ben's heart leaped at her words. The sudden shift from despair to opportunity was disorienting, yet exhilarating. He could hardly believe the turn of events. A moment ago, all had seemed lost, and now, unexpectedly, his path was clear. With a nod of gratitude to the employee, Ben quickly made his way to the boarding gate. Ben settled into his seat, the only empty one on the plane. Suddenly, the pilot's voice filled the cabin, clear and warm over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest aboard today, Veteran Ben, heading to a distinguished ceremony." Ben's eyes widened in surprise. The recognition was unexpected, bringing a flush of pride and humility. The pilot's welcome was a balm, soothing the earlier sting of the day's events. At the pilot's warm acknowledgement, a wave of relief washed over Ben. He smiled, feeling a sense of belonging and appreciation he hadn't felt in hours. As the flight neared its destination, Ben's anticipation for the ceremony grew. He imagined the gathering, the respect and recognition, the shared stories among fellow veterans. Ben started to prepare for landing, organizing his belongings and straightening up. Ben stepped off the plane with a dignified poise, a renewed sense of purpose evident in his stride. The challenges of the day had not dampened his spirit, but rather fortified his resolve. Upon arrival at the ceremony location, Ben was greeted with warm smiles and heartfelt handshakes. The welcome was a stark contrast to the day's earlier events, filling him with a sense of belonging and appreciation. Ben looked around, taking in the faces of his fellow veterans, feeling a deep connection to each of them. The ceremony of honor had begun. The moment arrived for Ben to take the stage. With each step towards the podium, his heart swelled with a mix of pride and responsibility. This was his moment to share his story, to represent his fellow servicemen and women. The room hushed in anticipation. Ben began his speech, his voice steady and clear. He spoke of his time in service, of the bonds formed and the sacrifices made. His words were heartfelt, painting a vivid picture of the life of a soldier. He talked about the challenges, the triumphs, and the unbreakable spirit of those who serve. As his speech neared its end, Ben shared the story of his phone call. He revealed how an old friend, a high-ranking military officer, had come to his aid in a moment of need. The tale added a layer of humanity and vulnerability to his speech, illustrating the enduring bonds formed in service. The audience listened intently, moved by the display of loyalty and friendship that transcended time and rank. Ben concluded his speech, and the ceremony drew to a close with a powerful tribute to all veterans. There was a moment of collective reflection, honoring the sacrifices and valor of those who had served. The applause that followed was not just for Ben, but for every veteran present, a recognition of their shared legacy of service. As the ceremony ended, Ben felt a profound sense of fulfillment, his journey culminating in a fitting tribute to a life of service.